So the United Kingdom recently saw its 5th Prime Minister in 6 years elected. So I thought that now would be a good time to do an assessment of who is the greatest communicator leader of the modern age. Now, that's not to say that US presidents or UK prime ministers have been the best communicators in the world, or even the worst. Right now, I think that Mia Mottley of Barbados and Jacinda Ardern of New Zealand are two of the very best communicators in the world right now. And sadly, Nigeria's very own Muhammadu Buhari probably takes the prize for the worst.
His genuine international outlook exhibited by his leadership of the United Nations. Your Excellency delegates, the theme of the current General Assembly is galvanizing multilateral efforts.
Nevertheless, UK prime ministers and US presidents happen to be the leaders that I personally know the best, so that's who I'm going to focus on. 16 leaders going right back to Ronald Reagan and Margaret Thatcher, up to Rishi Sunak and Joe Biden today. Who's the best? Who's the worst? My assessment. As always, please do like and subscribe to this video because it tells the YouTube algorithms that this stuff is worth watching. And leave a comment in the section below on who you would personally pick as your best, greatest, most awesome leader communicator of the modern age. So let's start with how I'm going to decide who places where on the list. I'm going to be using 5 criteria, but the important thing to note is that politics is not one of them. Now, by nature, I am a left-leaning sort of guy because, you know, I care about human rights, civil rights, concern for your fellow human being, that sort of thing. But to be fair to the candidates, it's important that I leave my own personal politics aside and judge them purely on their communication skills as opposed to what I personally think of their politics. If I didn't, then Donald Trump and Boris Johnson would be placing bottom of the list, and spoiler alert, they're not. So with that, here are the criteria. Number 1, public speaking. How well could they give a speech that was equal to the needs of the moment? Number 2, connection. If you've watched any of my videos, you will have heard me talk about how connection is the highest form of communication, and especially for a leader who has to demonstrate the connection with their electorate to carry them with them, that is a particularly important skill to have. So connection is number 2. Then we have questioning at number 3, which is how effectively, convincingly, and confidently could they deal with tough questions, the kind of tough questions that every leader is going to face. 4 is charisma. Charisma really does help you carry people along with your vision and your ideas for the future and for the plans that you have to solve the problems of your country. So how charismatic are these leaders? And finally, persuasiveness, because every leader has to be able to persuade people around them towards their point of view. So that is a critically important skill and quality to be able to demonstrate if you want to consider yourself a great communicator. Sure, there are different criteria that I could have used, but that's what I've settled on, so there. Each leader will get a score out of 25. So starting in reverse order, I wonder who comes bottom of the list. No real surprise that Liz Truss comes in bottom of our list. She was the shortest serving UK Prime Minister in history, and in large part that was down to her very poor communication skills. She was no good at public speaking, couldn't connect with people, terrible at answering questions, zero charisma, and really could hardly persuade people to her point of view. So really she is the worst communicator on this list. And there were quite a few contenders. If you want to watch a little bit more detail as to why I think she was such a poor public speaker, you can watch one of my videos on her. But really, can anyone really argue with her at number 16?
In December, I'll be in Beijing, opening up new pork markets.
Number 15. Following very closely behind or in front is Theresa May. Now, I have a little bit of sympathy for Theresa because she was basically leader at the wrong time. Had she been Prime Minister during COVID, I think she may have come out with her reputation enhanced, a bit like people like Angela Merkel and Jacinda Ardern. She certainly wouldn't have been partying like it's 1999 like Boris Johnson whilst telling the country to stay in during lockdown. But
them's the breaks.
And really, Theresa May's communication style was so poor that she was known as the Maybot, which really indicates how wooden and unconvincing she was as a communicator. And she also did this really weird thing of micro expressions that just betrayed her inner lack of confidence all the time. Done another video on that you might want to take a look at. So Theresa May comes in at number 15 because, yeah, like Liz Truss, she just wasn't convincing as a communicator. Although I did like her dance moves. Number 14. George Bush Sr. was by all accounts a pretty decent guy in that kind of old school gentleman kind of way. There really wasn't that much to him communication wise. Probably his most famous moment was when he told people to
read my lips.
And then went on to raise taxes as politicians do. I did respect, though, the way he was quite passionate about defending his nice guy image.
The headline on it was, "Too nice to be president."
Niceness, sure. Decency, what's wrong with that? Toughness, fiber, strength, perception of the strengths of this country, I've got it. I understand it. But I just am not a person who feels you have to be ugly.
And given the nasty age in which we currently live, that is actually pretty much to his credit. So he comes in just above Theresa May, but not much higher. Unlucky, number 13. Coming in at number 13 is another Brit, Gordon Brown. Now, here was a big-brained, hugely consequential politician, but being smart is not the same as being a great communicator, and Gordon Brown really wasn't. He suffered by comparison with a contemporary politician. We'll hear more about him later, but really Gordon struggled with many things, including especially connecting with other people, which was best shown when he tried to smile. Yeah, Gordon Brown didn't cut it as a leader, and a big part of that was because he just couldn't connect with other people, sometimes gave a decent speech, but overall a poor communicator, and that's why he is my number 13. Number 12. Current US President Joe Biden comes in at number 12, and I've made allowances for the fact that he suffered from a pretty debilitating stammer right from childhood. But even after allowing for all that, he really is a pretty bland communicator. I can't remember a speech that he gave that was particularly inspiring. He's not that good at answering questions, kind of rambles and goes all over the place. There have been attempts to kind of make him look cool with these dark Brandon memes, and I do like his aviator sunglasses, but really there's just not much to commend him for in terms of his communication, which is why he comes quite low down, except for one particular superpower that he has, which is the power of empathy.
When I started, I used to
talk like this. And it took a lot of practice, but I promise you, you can do it. I promise you. And don't let it define you. You're handsome, you're smart, you're a good guy. I really mean it. Don't let it define you.
Empathy is a really important skill or quality to possess, especially if you want to be able to connect with people. And probably because he has had some tragic losses in his life. He lost his first wife and his daughter, I believe, in a car accident, which was pretty horrific. And of course, the fact that he has struggled with the stammer all his life. He really does demonstrate an ability to understand other people's pain, other people's difficulties, other people's tragedies. And that is to his immense credit. He's been able to persuade quite a broad range of people, from progressives on the left to kind of conservative Democrats on the right, which again is a pretty good indication of his communication skills. But overall, he doesn't place that highly because, well, there's just not enough to him to take him higher. Number 11. British Prime Minister John Major comes in at number 11, and when the creators of the popular TV series Spitting Image were deciding how to portray his character, they famously made him grey, and that was really an indication of the fact that he was pretty universally seen as a boring guy. Now, a lot of that is to do with being compared to his predecessor. Will be coming up shortly. But in truth, it's because there wasn't that much memorable about him. In my opinion, he was competent in pretty much each area, but just not exceptional at any. And so that's why I have brought him in at number 11. There's not really much I can point to one way or the other that was terrible. Certainly nothing I can point to that was exceptional. Just kind of middle of the road, like grey, really. Number 10. We now move on to the current British Prime Minister, Rishi Sunak, or as Joe Biden calls him,
Rishi Sunak is now the Prime Minister.
Now, you might think it's a little bit early to be making a judgment about Rishi Sunak's communication skills, bearing in mind that he's only been leader for a few weeks now, and that is a fair point. But for my sins, I spent a lot of time over the summer watching him in the Conservative leadership hustings debates between him and Liz Truss.
And those are hours of my life I will never get back.
I've also seen him a few times now at the dispatch box during Prime Minister's Question Time, and I've watched a number of his speeches. So I think I can form an impression and an opinion of his skills as a communicator, though I will come back and revisit this when he's had a little bit more time to settle into the job. My overall assessment of him is that he has the chance to be a pretty effective communicator because he is very, very good at answering questions, and he does have an ability to kind of G up his troops and his supporters, which could serve him well as things go into the next general election. But he is also making some pretty basic mistakes that are completely undermining his strengths as a communicator. I didn't like some of the silly jokes he made about himself during the leadership hustings.
The sun has been shining, so much so that someone even said to me the other day, "Wow, you've got a great tan."
He zooms like an amateur, which really just bugged me, and I had to do a video on it as well. And despite being a pretty articulate guy, his first speech when he was elected leader of the Conservative Party was just strange.
I will work day in, day out to deliver for the British people.
I will reserve judgment, as I said, because it's quite possible that he will do something to surprise me, But I don't think so, so Rishi Sunak comes in at number 10. Number 9.
It's only our first exchange, and already the Prime Minister is asking me the questions. This approach is stuck in the past, and I want to talk about the future. He was the future once.
You know, I once read a quote about David Cameron that said he didn't want to be Prime Minister. He wanted to have been Prime Minister. And it kind of spoke to the fact that although this was a really intelligent guy, very articulate, looked the part, there was something missing in terms of substance. Possibly because he was a PR guy beforehand, so it was all about spin and saying the right things, even though it sometimes lacked meaning. But really, you have to say that he had every chance to be a fantastic communicator. To become leader of the Conservative Party, he gave a really good speech entirely from memory that just blew their socks away. But at the same time, he was responsible for what I consider to be one of the worst pieces of political messaging in British history, and that was how the government dealt with the vote around Brexit. Boris Johnson and the Brexit campaigners led their campaign with a really simple, to be honest, quite a simplistic message of take back control. Now, whatever that meant, really, most British people took it as an assertion that if they went through with Brexit, they would be able to reassert their sovereignty and recover their Britishness, whatever that meant for them. By contrast, David Cameron led a movement or a campaign that was basically termed Project Fear, and it involved trying to scare people about what would happen if we left the European Union. Now, I personally believe that they were right about all the things that they predicted, but that isn't the point. When you are thinking communication, especially when you are trying to get people to vote for your side, you have to not just give them something to vote against, you have to give them something to vote for. It was communication malpractice, in my opinion. And for that reason, the Brexit campaign gathered momentum while the Project Fear campaign basically stalled and led to Brexit as we know it today and the years and years of turmoil that it has led to. And then even worse than that, once it had happened, once he had realized that he had lost the vote through his pretty terrible communication all round, what did David Cameron do? He said, "See ya suckers, I'm out of here." He resigned and left the country in turmoil. Pretty terrible stuff. So he would have been much higher, I think, in his communication standings or in these communication standings, but for that pretty terrible piece of communication. But it was so consequential that I couldn't ignore it. And that's why David Cameron is my number 9. Number 8. And in comes George W. Bush. Now, I want you to put aside the fact that this was not a smart man. In fact, some of his utterances were positively Homer Simpson-esque in their stupidity.
Fool me once, shame on you. If fool me, we can't get fooled again.
But in this exercise, we have to put stupid to one side. And when you do that, you actually come to realize that George W. Bush had a lot of strengths as a communicator. It's easy to forget that in the advent of the 9/11 attacks in America, he had an astronomical 92% approval rating. Now, part of that obviously is because he was a president at war, and presidents at war normally get a bump in approval. But also a part of it was that he was perfectly able to tap into the emotions and the thinking of the American people. And that is the big purpose that a leader has to have and a communicator has to achieve.
I can hear you.
At the same time, I personally really loved the fact that at a time when his entire country was baying for blood, he took the time to visit a mosque and give a really wonderful speech titled "Islam is Peace."
The face of terror is not the true faith of Islam. That's not what Islam is all about. Islam is peace.
And although he came across on television as a bit of a bumbling fool, reportedly in person he was a very personable and very charming guy, which probably explains why he's enjoying a bit of a renaissance since his time as president, notably striking up a great friendship with Michelle Obama, another great communicator that sadly never became president herself. So yes, George W. Bush was no genius, but hey, genius is overrated. In this communication exercise, he gets a score of 16 out of 25, which is why he comes in at number 8. Number 7. No politics, no politics, no politics. Boris Johnson. Bojo, as I like to call him, has everything you need to be a great communicator. He's an incredibly articulate person, probably the most articulate one on this list, capable of everyday accessible language, as well as high rhetorical flourishes with classical references. He loved a good put down and was a pretty strong performer in Prime Minister's Question Time, although he didn't really answer any questions. And his buffoonish character with that unkempt hair and disheveled appearance was actually carefully cultivated to give him a man of the people, non-politician kind of appearance. And it really worked. He was able to capture and connect with and convinced a large section of the population, winning a pretty big majority in the only election he fought before he was kicked out. And that really stands as a testament to his ability to persuade people from kind of a wide range of characters, wide range of demographics to his point of view. And that is a sign of a pretty effective communicator. And then there was the other side of Boris. If we were to stop there, Boris would have a pretty good shot at being much higher up the list. But we can't because he didn't. Because there were the flaws, so many flaws in the man that completely undermined his effectiveness as a communicator. Quick lawyer's note, everything Collar says next is allegedly, just so he doesn't get sued. The man was a serial liar, partying all the way through lockdown and then claiming he didn't realize he was at a party. That over-the-top Etonian pomposity thing quickly got tired and old for more than half the country, and by the end it was his own party members that kicked him out of Downing Street because they just couldn't take the lies.
Is Boris Johnson honest?
I tried to give him the benefit of the doubt for as long as possible, and ultimately I reached the conclusion that I couldn't, and that's why I resigned.
Liz Truss, is he honest?
He has been very clear himself that he made mistakes in government.
Tom Tiggenhat, is Boris Johnson an honest man?
And that is committing one of the cardinal sins of communication, which is he lost his credibility. It doesn't matter how articulate you are if nobody believes you. And so that is why Boris comes in much, much lower than he should. Scores 17 out of 25 on my communication criteria. Number 6. The Iron Lady herself, Margaret Thatcher. As the first female leader of her country in an era of immense male chauvinism, Margaret Thatcher used every ounce of her communication ability to reshape the political narrative and change the trajectory of her country. She was a force of nature and a leader of national and global consequence, loved and hated in equal measure. She was a strong public speaker, which I love because she didn't start out that way and was just willing to put in the work. And she gave one of the most referenced political speeches in British history.
To those waiting with bated breath for that favourite media catchphrase, the U-turn, I have only one thing to say. U-turn if you want to. The ladies not for turning.
Some found her manner haughty and arrogant. I personally didn't like her politics, and she fell down in one key area, which is that of empathy and the ability to connect with people. But you cannot deny that somebody who led her party to 3 consecutive victories, becoming the longest serving Prime Minister of the 20th century, really was able to carry people along with her, and that is to her immense credit as a communicator, which is why she scores 18 on my communication criteria. Number 5. Donald Trump. Now remember, we are going to ignore the semi-fascist, often racist, downright traitorous conduct of the 44th president, and instead only focus on how he communicated. And when you put the craziness aside, and there was a lot of craziness, you actually realize that with one big caveat, Donald was a very effective communicator. I mean, how else can you persuade a whole bunch of people to storm the Capitol and commit treason just to keep you in power? On public speaking, yes, he rambled and spoke a lot of nonsense, but he was an incredibly fluent speaker, able to regale his audience for hours without notes and barely a single disfluency, that's your ums and ahs, all in the face of the cameras and the fake news media scrutinizing his every word. That is a remarkable talent. He defeated a really capable field of 17 Republican candidates to win the leadership of the party, and then going on to defeat establishment favorite Hillary Clinton to win the presidency, with a little help from Vladimir. Nobody could do the cut down insult like Donald.
He's not a war hero.
He's a war hero.
He's a war hero.
5.5 years.
He's a war hero because he was captured. I like people that weren't captured, okay? I hate to tell you.
She's crooked Hillary. Don't you understand that? This is one of the most crooked politicians in history.
And as unattractive a quality as that might be, it is in fact a political skill. And then there is the caveat of Donald Trump, which is that for all that he was able to be the voice of the so-called forgotten man, he really was never able to reach or connect with the other half of the country, becoming really one of the most unpopular presidents there has ever been. And that marks him down significantly in the communication stakes. When you also realize that he was never able to answer questions with coherent answers, suddenly his skills as a communicator start to come into focus, and you realize that there were some fundamental flaws that just let him down. Hard to be a great communicator when half the people in front of you just really don't want to listen. And that is why my score for Donald Trump is 19 out of 25. Number 4. So if you ask me to work with any leader from this list, it would of course be Barack Obama, and his strengths as a communicator are pretty obvious. No one could do the big stage set piece keynote speech quite like Obama, with his soaring oratory, that deep baritone voice, and his ability to inspire an audience with a compelling message of hope. And his White House Correspondents' Dinner speech in 2011, complete with roasting of Donald Trump, was literally one of the funniest political speeches ever given by a leader.
Say what you will about Mr. Trump, he certainly would bring some change to the White House.
He managed to win over a broad section of the country, including many Republicans, especially when he first started. So in many ways, he was the archetypal modern president. So it would be easy to talk about his many strengths, but I think they're quite obvious. So I want to talk about his weaknesses and he did have them. He had a very professorial manner, which for many was actually quite disengaging. And for all his eloquence and fluency, when he had to answer questions without a script, he was sometimes very hesitating, using a lot of ums and ahs, which potentially made him come across as indecisive.
We don't have all the information yet, but I want to say that I have a lot of confidence generally in the FBI, and they've got a difficult job. So I'm going to wait and see to see if there's any other. Well, I mean, Chuck, what I'll say is that if.
And as much as I think this was probably more down to the Republicans and Fox News, we cannot ignore the fact that under his leadership, the country became more divided than ever, and he really wasn't able to reach and connect with most of the people on the other side of the country. Maybe tough to say, but them's the breaks. So although he is a great orator, a great public speaker, certainly full of charisma, I couldn't mark him as the highest in this list because I think there were a couple of areas in which he just fell ever so slightly short. And to make it into the top 3, you really have to be outstanding in pretty much everything. So my score for Barack Obama is 21 out of 25. Number 3. To make it into our top 3, as well as scoring highly on the criteria, you really have to have some sort of superpower, and Bill Clinton's power was cool. He was charismatic, the kind of guy that you were just magnetically drawn to whenever he was in the room. He was able to use the power of intimacy to make a packed auditorium feel like he was telling them a secret, and each individual in that audience feel like he was speaking only to them. He had a folksy kind of manner that meant even when he was discussing complex ideas, he made it feel simple enough for people to understand.
One of the reasons we have so many children in so much trouble in so many places in this nation is because they have seen so little opportunity, so little responsibility, so little loving, caring community that they literally cannot imagine the life we are calling them to lead.
On every level, this man was a great communicator. And in fact, if you think about probably what he is most famous for, which is the whole Monica Lewinsky trial, think about the fact that he was able to get through that ordeal and come out in some sense with his reputation enhanced by using the power of sincerity so that you believed him when he said,
I did not have sexual relations with that woman, Miss Lewinsky. I never told anybody to lie, not a single time, never. These allegations are false, and I need to go back to work for the American people. Thank you.
Okay, maybe you didn't quite believe him, and of course he benefited from being around at a time where women were less likely to be believed on certain things, but still, come on, look at that face. He pulled off sincerity very effectively, whatever you think about the morality of it all, which is why Bill Clinton is number 3 on my list and scores 22 out of 25. Number 2. Coming in at number 2 is the great communicator himself, Ronald Reagan. Now, to dismiss Reagan as just an actor is actually to miss the entire point, because being a good actor on screen doesn't mean you'll be a great performer off screen, as all those terrible Oscar acceptance speeches really tell us.
You like me right now. You like me.
Reagan was nearly perfect in pretty much every way when it comes to communication. His infectious positivity made everyone around him feel better about themselves, and his ability to sell a big idea to people even those that disagreed with him, was really quite remarkable.
Mr. Gorbachev, open this gate. Mr. Gorbachev, tear down this wall.
And he was masterful at the one-line statement that just cut through the verbiage to the heart of the issue.
Next Tuesday, all of you will go to the polls. We'll stand there in the polling place and make a decision. I think when you make that decision, it might be well if you would ask yourself, are you better off than you were 4 years ago?
At times he could be a little bit vague and unconvincing, especially as he got older during his presidency. And it can't be ignored that he really had very little empathy for certain sections of the community, namely black and brown people. But still, putting that aside, he was a highly effective communicator. And but for the gentleman in our number one spot, he certainly would have been right at the top. So Ronald Reagan gets 23 out of 25 in our communication criteria. And so having said all of that and charted our way through 40 years of history of good and bad leaders, that brings us down to our number one spot. Tony Blair. Now, a reminder that we are not allowing politics to play any part of this discussion. If it did and the Iraq War was to be considered and all the war crimes that went with it, well, Tony Blair wouldn't have any part on my list. But we have to put that aside. And when we leave that brand contamination out of the way, you will come to realize that, in fact, Tony Blair was a master at pretty much everything. He could do it all. He could do the big set piece speech almost as well as Barack Obama.
That is the patriotism for the future, where never again do we fight our politics by appealing to one section of our nation at the expense of another, where your child in distress is my child, your parent ill and in pain is my parent, your friend unemployed and helpless is my friend, your neighbour, my neighbour. That is the true patriotism of a nation.
He was a consummate performer in Prime Minister's Question Time, as good, if not better, than Margaret Thatcher. And in fact, this is one of the reasons I place him higher than his American counterparts, who really didn't have that kind of experience of having to debate other political leaders on a regular weekly basis. He could do sincerity as well as Bill Clinton and the man of the people thing just like Donald Trump. He was a master of the political soundbite, using it to set the narrative.
They kept faith with Princess Diana. They liked her, they loved her. They regarded her as one of the people. She was the people's princess.
He knew how to make the visuals work for him without using words. He established close personal friendships with Bill Clinton on the one hand, and then way over to the right with George W. Bush on the other hand. And he was even able to tell a pretty good joke almost as well as Ronald Reagan himself.
Is this the same man that 2 weeks ago told the Daily Telegraph, "I am and always have been a conservative to the core of my being"? Then 1 week ago, he's the heir to New Labour, and today he's a liberal conservative. No wonder he's against identity cards.
And even when it came to the Iraq War, as politically damaging as that was for him, you still have to respect the skill, some would say lies, with which he was able to convince an entirely anti-war country to support him going into the war, and then to vote for him even after the debacle of the whole Iraq War had become pretty apparent. That is a skill of a great communicator, right or wrong, respect or don't respect him, love him or hate him. You have to accept that Tony Blair was the ultimate master communicator as a political leader. And in fact, if we look at many of the leaders of the world today, he really puts them to shame with his ability to frame his narrative, to frame his message, to connect with people, use his charisma, deal with questions, and give a pretty damn good speech, all wrapped up in just one guy. Tony Blair is my great communicator of this list. Make of that what you will. So there you go, my rundown of the 16 presidents and prime ministers of the last 40 years or so. I'm sure you agree with me in some, disagree with me in others. Learn from them, study them, use them to improve your own communication skills. And most of all, let me know what you think in the comments below. Especially want to know who you would have put at the #1 spot. As always, feel free to reach out to me whenever you need any help with your communication skills, and I will see you on the next video.